we raised the question on Hashem creating a situation, obviously, where the angels say to Moshe, what? What's a human being doing in heaven? And you're getting the Torah? What does Torah do with you? Torah should stay here with us. And Hashem said to Moshe, no, answer them. And Moshe did. And he gave such a great, brilliant answer that they were like, okay, like, whoa, you're right. You get the Torah. It's for man, not for us. And they gave him presents. And then the Rebbe quoted another midrash that has this commonality of Hashem going to all the nations of the world and offering them the Torah. Literally every single nation of the 70 nations of the world. And every single one refused, except, of course, the Jewish people, which is why it says that we really have a right over all the possessions of the world, because like we're picking up the slack for everyone. The Torah was given to everyone, so to speak. In theory, it was offered to everyone. They said no, we said yes, we're doing their job. We have the right to their possessions. And then asking sort of the same question on both of these midrashim, like, what's going on? How can there be a thought that the Torah should be the angels? I mean, what in the world about Torah could be the angels? And how could there be a thought that the nations of the world should get the Torah? Torah's talking to the Jewish people about the responsibilities of the Jewish people in a world of non-Jews. How could Hashem be giving this to the nations of the world? So to answer that, we're starting by trying to understand the dynamics of an angel versus us, which of course has been a theme running through this Maimon, like in the very beginning, when we discussed the crowns, and we crown Hashem, Batar Shitra Lo Imo, the crown that his mother, the Jewish people, crowned him. But then it speaks about the crowns that the Bnei Medina, the people of the country, give to the king, which are the angels. So the angels are crowning, we're crowning, and we said, no, we're really crowning. We form the crowns, but then because we crown, the angels can crown. So there's really, so to speak, our crowns that are then through the angels given to Hashem. And then Hashem takes these crowns and keeps one and gives us two back through the angels. So we see throughout this mimer some dynamics of trying to understand this interplay of us and of the angels in our service to Hashem. And of course, most specifically in terms of the giving of the Torah. So we're right in the middle of understanding this difference between the service of the angels and our service. And the Rebbe said, in order to understand that, let's understand this idea of the verse that we quoted from Shir Hashirim, I ate ya'iri im difshi. I ate my honeycombs with my honey. Now, honeycombs are not the same sweetness as honey. And we already learned that the honeycombs refer to the brachos of Shema, those two long brachos before Shema. And the honey refers to Shema itself. And we said that the honeycombs, the work of the brachos of Shema, that's the work of the angels. That the brachos of Shema are discussing the angels. If you would actually think about what we're saying, yeah, we're talking about all the angels, right? And we said this is actually really a reference going back to the source of our own animal soul, because our animal soul is a spiritual animal, and the angels are spiritual animals. There's higher spiritual animals than my animal soul, but through doing the work of the brachos of Kriyat Shema, the focusing on God's angels, I can refine that manifestation many, many miles removed inside myself, my own animal soul, which is rooted in those angels. That's all the honeycomb. The honey, that's Shema. The honey, that's the neshama. And all my work in the brachos of Shema are not touching the honey. They're not touching the godly soul. So we have the honeycombs, we have the angels, which even evolves into my animal soul, and we have Shema, we have the honey. We have my godly soul. And Rebbe says, well, let's understand this a bit more, this idea of the angels, the honeycombs, the honey. Let's understand really this idea of the honey. You know, it's very interesting. Not chocolate, not sugar, not candies, not cake. In Torah, we speak about honey as this form of sweetness. And you could say, no, you know, sweetness. I'm a Jew. I'm a chassid. I need honey. You know, I need sugar in my coffee. I just drink coffee. I need sweetness in my service of God. It has to taste good. I'm not so petty. I'm not so low. I'm not a child. I don't need to be bribed. I serve God. That's all it needs to be. And that's amazing. Of course, that is true on a certain level. On a certain level, yes, we're soldiers. Yes, we're servants. Yes, we're slaves. Yes, we're avodim of Hashem. Yes, we have Kabbalah soul. Yes, nullification, accepting the yoke of authority. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. But we also need honey. We need the honey. We need the sweetness. The sweetness, the Rebbe says, is symbolic of a deep pleasure in God. And again, you could say, so, I mean, it would be nice, or it wouldn't be nice, or maybe it's an extra, maybe it's a frills, like who cares? And the Alter Rebbe says, no, we care. We care. Because the pleasure is what's causing that the souls are moving in their divine service. When we have a pleasure in our avodas Hashem, when we enjoy it, when there's the geschmack, when it feels good, it affects us and we move. And if we're doing what we're doing detached, without pleasure, it doesn't affect us and we don't move. Bottom line, if you're not enjoying it, it's not affecting you. If it's not affecting you, you're not moving. You're not getting closer to God. You're not achieving the point of all this work. If we think of the loves, right? We said Shema is the service of the soul. And then Shema, unlike by the angels, we don't say this when we're talking about the brachas of Shema. When we're talking about Shema, we're talking about the work of the soul, we say to love Hashem, b'chol ma'odecha. And b'chol ma'odecha means limitlessly. And then there's an even higher love than that. As we speak about in Tanya, what's the highest love called? Ahava b'sa'anugim. A love that's a tainug. A love that's a pleasure. That's not the service of the angels. Again, in the brachos of Shema, we don't say b'chol ma'odecha. In the brachos of Shema, we're not assuming there's any mahalchim here, any movers. They're angels. They're static. They're stationary. But when we say Shema, Shema Yisrael, listen, the Jew, Shema means like understand, get it. Come to this love. Think, grasp, internalize, absorb. Come to this limitless love, and then you're going to move. Just like as we quoted, it says, Eim habanim smecha. The mother of the children are joyous. So you've got the mother, and they've got the children, and they've got the joy. The mother, that's our intellect. The children are our emotions. And that's how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to use your mind, contemplate, meditate, think, understand, grip, grasp Hashem, and then you're going to have a child. And the child is going to be your emotional relationship, which is the point. That's the point. This is like the entire Tanya encapsulated in this thought. Because when you love, and when you feel an awe, an nullification, and submission, you're an Oved Hashem. You're serving God. You're completely dedicated with everything, with all your heart, with all your mind, with your speech, with your actions, with your feelings, with your thoughts. Everything you can do, you want to do. You love, you want to be with God, you want to give to God. You have this awe. I don't want to do anything to separate and sever that relationship. You're completely, absolutely given over. What can I do to be one with God? That's aim habanim. There's the aim, there's the mother. I'm using my mind to understand and think and meditate and get into God. And then there's a child, the emotions, which is the catalyst of my being a living servant of God, an Oved Hashem. But the verse doesn't just say aim habanim, mother of the children. It says aim habanim smecha, the mother of the children is joyous. What's the joyous bit? What's that word there for? Because there has to be joy. It has to be pleasure. It has to be geschmack. It has to taste good. And if it doesn't, meaning if you are, well, you got to do in this world. So you got to learn Torah and you got to think about God and you do all that and then nothing happens. Nothing happens. There's no emotions being produced. Well, I still got to check on my chart that I learned Torah. Yes, you did, 100%. And that's awesome. We're really happy and proud of you, but that's not the point. Aim habanim. We want to delve and contemplate and meditate and connect and understand God to have an emotional relationship, because when we have that emotional relationship, we're there. We're going to be a servant of God. But if I use my mind without pleasure, no emotions are going to happen. It's not going to go anywhere. Nothing's going to be born from this thought, from this contemplation on Hashem. And the rest, this really works with everything. It's not unique to this very specific situation of contemplating, meditating, thinking, but not having the pleasure factor. The Rebbe says, You could see it actually, it could be a positive thing. It depends how you use it. It's a tool, or it could be very negative. So for example, the Rebbe said, if you worked on yourself to be detached from something gashmias, I don't know, like let's say you were really into food and you're like, whoa, this is unhealthy. This is not good. Gotta stop this. It's going bad places. It's gonna make me unhealthy. I can't do this. And you really, really worked on yourself to be detached, like not to feel this pleasure drive for food. And then there's this whole deep dive. You're at a place and everyone's talking about the whatever, the restaurant, the this, the that. They're all their Shavous recipes. Everyone loves to be in the kitchen for hours doing nothing but making this type of cheesecake and this type of cheesecake. And whoa, all the stuff that used to excite you so much, and you're hearing, you're absorbing, and it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect you. To put it in our lexicon, to put it in our prototype format, you've got the aim, you've got the mind, you're all deeply discussing your cheesecakes, but there's no bunim. No child is born. You're not feeling it. Why? Because there's no smecha. Because you detached yourself. So since you detached yourself, even if there's a deep dive around you into this very topic that was your, oh my, this doesn't mean anything. No child is born from it. That would obviously be a very positive way to use this as a tool to not get sucked into these things. Obviously, on the negative side, same way you detach yourself from the cheesecakes or anything else, you fill in the blank to anything else. Well, what if someone feels distant from God? So if they feel distant from God, even though they are doing the step, they're contemplating, they're really thinking into God, they're learning Tanya, they're learning a mimer, they're in an amazing class, and it's really intellectually getting to them, and they're really filling their mind with this intellect, and nothing's happening. Zero. What do you mean nothing's happening? I'm learning. You're learning. But aim habanim. The purpose of the learning is to create the emotional connection, and that's not happening. It's not happening because there's no smecha, because you have no pleasure in it, because you're completely detached, because it's an intellectual exercise. And if it's just an intellectual exercise, it doesn't work. That person could say, wait a minute, but that's not how it's supposed to be, right? Fine, I am not having intellectual pleasure. I am not having pleasure. The honey is not happening for me here. Okay. I see all that. But bottom line, isn't this like how it works? Isn't it like use your mind, contemplate, meditate, delve into godliness, and then guess what? There's gonna be a pleasure from that. Isn't that true? Isn't that like how it's supposed to work? Isn't that how we are spiritually wired? Like the Rebbe is saying, well, if you had pleasure, when you would learn, study, Hasidus, Tanya, Maimarim, contemplate, meditate, think, this would be what would happen. But since it's not happening, isn't the very embedded in it like the pleasure? Doesn't it like work that way? In other words, even if I start off not so interested, shouldn't the learning grip my mind and ignite my soul? Shouldn't it be like a catalyst, like a charge? And then I would have this pleasure? And that actually is a great question. It makes sense. We would think that. Yeah, we would think that. But if it's not happening, guess what? It must be that your contemplation, meditation, what you think is going on in your brain is not the real deal. Meaning, if a person started off not feeling it, but they truly immerse their minds in godliness, they would feel it. They would have the pleasure, it would be ignited, and they would have the emotions. It just does naturally flow. It's not like, oh, wait, let me take some honey off the shelf and pour it into this mixture. And then if I have the pleasure, that's not what we see in Chassidus. It doesn't say that. It says the contemplation creates the emotions. It doesn't say you have to have pleasure. Why not? Well, because the pleasure should happen naturally. When you're using your mind and immersing it in godliness, there's deep pleasure. Your soul is embedded in your mind. Your soul loves Torah. Torah is the deepest way you connect to God. Your soul's on fire. Your soul's excited. So there's pleasure, but you don't have pleasure. So obviously the Rebbe says the only way to understand that is that what you're doing isn't the real thing, which could mean any number of things. It could mean you're just using like the peripheral edge of your understanding, of your intellect. Like you're thinking, oh, I'm being misplaining, I'm contemplating, I'm deeply delving. And like, yeah, you're not really, or maybe this thing isn't even called hisbaininus. Maybe what you're doing isn't contemplation. It's actually more just, what we might view as more superficial learning, not deeply immersing yourself. And then if either of those two things happen, which means what the Rebbe is basically saying is either you're not really getting into the core of your mind in this, or even more simply, maybe this act you're doing that you're viewing as, oh yeah, this is what we mean, this is hisbaininus, or it's not hisbaininus. You're learning, you're translating, you're understanding, and that's it. Hisbaininus grips your mind. Hisbaininus, what you're full of is this godly thought. So maybe your whole brain isn't involved, or what you're doing isn't that. It's just like reading and translating. Yeah, I got it. Move on. Next. I got it. Move on. Next. So it's not feeling you. It's not contemplation. So therefore, your intellect in your godly soul is not ignited, and therefore the pleasure doesn't naturally flow, and therefore the emotions aren't naturally being produced. So what happens? Well, either what's happening is, yeah, you didn't even get to emotions, or maybe on some level there's emotions, but they're very covered over. So you're not feeling the feel that you're sort of blundering somewhat in the direction of that in your mind. And then we could say, wait a minute, we got another problem. Doesn't every Jew by definition have a pleasure in God? Isn't that like how we explain ourselves? Like, don't we learn this stuff all the time that like, what am I? I am a godly soul. What does a godly soul want? God. That's all a godly soul wants is God. How do I get God? Most primarily by learning Torah. Deepest connection when I'm learning Hasidus, the core of God's intellect and the core of my soul, inner dimension to inner dimension of Torah, of soul. Isn't this all true? It is all true. Well, if it is all true, then by definition, I should have pleasure. That's just seemingly how it works. So this whole scenario the Rebbe is setting up that, well, the problem is you don't have pleasure. And because you don't have pleasure, therefore there's no emotions. And that's why you're learning and nothing's happening. Oh, like tisk, you messed up because you didn't have pleasure. But pleasure shouldn't be something I have to work on. And shouldn't be another check on my chart that, oh, and I'm learning with pleasure. That's who I am. That's the wiring of a Jew. Every Jew. We are, by definition, a godly soul. A godly soul is a piece of the very essence and being of God. All the godly soul wants is God. And the deepest way to connect to God is through learning Torah. And therefore, the deepest pleasure my soul has is when I'm learning Torah. Like, the pleasure's automatically embedded in the system, isn't it? So the Rebbe says, yeah, that's a great point. And yes, every Jew does have a deep, deep pleasure in God. And how can we prove this? Well, maybe not every Jew, maybe like the really holy ones. No, the Rebbe says because you see the opposite. Like, what's the opposite of pleasure? Pain. So when we see the pain that every Jew is willing to undergo, not to be separated from God, right? Like chapter 18 of Tanya. Every single Jew, even the Jew that never lived for God, is willing to die for God. Why? Because that Jew, when it comes to that ultimate moment, his soul is flaring up in him and he cannot be separated. And all the pain of losing his life and all of the future life that he'll never have, all of that pain, it's worth it because of his relationship with God. The pleasure and pain, the Rebbe is saying, it's like two ends of the same concept. As per my pain, as per my pleasure. As per my pleasure, as per my pain. So we can't prove that every Jew has deep, deep pleasure in God. But we can prove that every Jew is willing to undergo a lot of pain not to lose that relationship with God. So if every Jew is willing to undergo all that pain to not lose his relationship with God, this like proves, so to speak, the other side of the coin, that really every single Jew has deep, deep, deep pleasure with God. So the Rebbe sort of proved my point, my challenge to what he's saying, my question, like, so every Jew does have deep, deep pleasure in God. Same way you can prove the pain, we know the pleasure's there as well. The Rebbe says, it's true, but the problem is that deep pleasure, like your willingness to undergo that deep pain, that's an essence state. That's your core. You've ever been in a situation where they say, okay, let's activate your core muscles. You're like, huh? Yeah, underneath all those layers of whatever, there's core muscles there. Activate them. What do I do? So in our core, there's core pleasure in God. There's also core pain in separation from God. And we know how that core pain is activated when you're in a situation where you feel endangered and you are like, this is it. If I do this, I'll lose my relationship with God. So the same way there was that situation and that activated that core fear of separation pain, willingness to undergo pain because of that fear of losing the relationship, in that same deep, deep, deep core of your soul, there's absolute pleasure in God. And that's actually the absolute only thing you want. And it's the only thing that gives you pleasure. And it's the only thing that's real. And it's the only thing that's giving you any joy is your relationship with God. But we're not feeling it because it's in my core. What do I feel on the surface? What's my surface reality? What I'm thinking, what my emotions are feeling. In other words, how Hasidus would chart out the levels of self, of man, of the Jew, would be obviously first action, and then far deeper emotions, and then far deeper intellect, and then far deeper will, and then we come to the core, and that core is called pleasure. So the pleasure in God, this is all on the godly levels, is the core of the core of the core of my soul's existence. Much less than that, even though it's just, okay, action, emotion, thought, will, pleasure. It's only, it doesn't seem so much lower. But each one of these things are like huge, vast levels. So much, much, much lower than this pleasure is the mind. And even lower than that is the overt emotions. So living as a human being, what's on the surface of my reality is what I'm feeling, and then a little deeper than that, what I'm thinking. Getting into my pleasure, that's living at my core. So on my working reality, I'm not feeling the pleasure. I'm feeling what my emotions are feeling, which if we're talking about godliness here and you're not feeling your pleasure, according to what the Rebbe is saying, you don't really feel emotions. And I can feel, so to speak, I can be aware of what's going on in my mind. So in my mind is godly thoughts right now. For all of those, hard to see with everybody's screen on, but for all of those that are paying attention, your minds are full of this godly idea. And according to what the Rebbe is saying, if you're in touch with your pleasure, if your pleasure of God has been pulled out, right? Like I said, activating those core muscles. If your pleasure of God has ascended, meaning ascended, I don't know if that's the right word for it, it's probably not. I mean, like that core is now part of your surface reality. So if that core pleasure of God is part of your surface reality, right now, you're feeling it. You're feeling a greater and deeper love and awe of God because your mind, you're listening. Again, there's a lot of ifs here. If number one is if you're all paying attention and like your mind is just full of this and nothing else. And if number two is if that core muscle of pleasure has been so accessed that it's part of your working arsenal. So you're getting the geschmack, the pleasure in the learning. It feels great. You're connecting to Hashem. Then what naturally flows, what you're feeling, is love, is awe, is both. But the Rebbe is saying, if you are a Jew, which means in your core you have deep pleasure in God, but you never worked with that pleasure, you never activated that core muscle of self, that it's pulled out and part of your regular arsenal of revealed powers, your mind can be full. You could be doing nothing else but learning and you're getting it and it's clear and you don't feel anything because the Rebbe is saying, without that pleasure, but I have it. Yeah, buried deep in your core. That's not counting. Without you being able to access that deep pleasure, all the mind's not going to create what it's supposed to. The whole point of it, which is the emotional connection to God on a deeper and deeper level that will make me one who serves. But if I had that pleasure, oh, that's what the verse means. Aim, habanim, smecha. The mother, I'm using the mind. And guess what? There's kids. There's an emotional response. Why? Because smecha. Because I have a deep pleasure in the process. Because I'm deeply feeling the joy that I'm connecting to God this way. And this goes to deeper and deeper and deeper love, like we're saying, Shema b'chol modecha, limitless. Like we said, passive, what we talk about in Shema, ahavanugim, a love that's a tainug, that's a deep, deep, deep pleasure. Right? The Alter Rebbe discusses this. This is, of course, the last thought in the Hayom Yom, which I think always is a very powerful point, like the culmination of a year of trying to live like a chassid, right? Our final thought after a year of living with the Rebbe, living like a chassid is, Im chalo chafatzti. I don't want anything else but you. I don't want your Gan Eden. I don't want your higher Gan Eden. I just want you. How do you get that? The Rebbe says, when you've activated your core, where you're in touch with who you really are, when you have a geschmack, a pleasure in God. And then when you learn, boom, it happens. And it happens, so to speak, automatically, because you already did the work of pulling out who you are, pulling out your soul's deepest desire, your shuka, your longing, which is compelled by this deep pleasure to be one with God. And then the learning, you feel and you do, and like you're amazing. But without activating that core, you're learning. But that's where it ends. And again, it's not like, oh, wow, we feel really upset with you that you're learning. I mean, learning is a wonderful thing, but it's not just supposed to be a wonderful thing. It's supposed to move me to be, as we're saying in this mimer, a mahalech, a mover, someone who's going higher and higher and higher in the relationship with God. And for that, I need the emotions. And for that, I need the contemplation with pleasure. Any thoughts on this? Any thoughts on this idea? Because I think it's such a pivotal theme here of, like we, so often we can be really working hard. And it's not that, the Rebbe is saying don't work hard. But the Rebbe is saying there's a tremendous value to loving it, to feeling the geschmack in it. So does this resonate? Can you think of times when you've maybe not doing all the deep work that I was saying, but nowadays, Mashiach times, things go a lot faster sometimes. Just like really feeling like, yeah, I get what the Rebbe is saying, because when I'm in sync, when my inner self and outer reality are in sync, I do enjoy it. I'm doing it and I enjoy it. And when I enjoy it, I see that what I'm doing makes an impression on me. And if I'm not enjoying it, I'm still doing it. And guess what? It's not making an impression on me. That is, in essence, what the Rebbe is saying. Experience this?
Yeah, which mimer is this?
Tzenu Uri'ena Bnos Tzion, Tafshin Chaf Zayin. Mimer, the Rebbe said, early Shavous morning of 1967.
Interesting, because it reminds me of the mimer like Tiem Shakila Bakara, Artsachar, that Dina Posner taught us in 10th grade, where an amazing mimer. I was talking about emotions when we don't feel it, and if we're barren from emotions. And there the Rebbe was talking about if you don't have intellectual excitement.
If you don't have pleasure, if you don't have a geschmack in Hashem, then what you're doing isn't going to impact you. And if you have that, if it tastes good, if you have that geschmack, if you have that pleasure in what you're doing, then what you're doing impacts you. That's like bottom line what the Rebbe is
Very
saying here.
interesting, yeah. The wording over there was, I think like Yisraksha Sichlis or something like that, like intellectual excitement. And that comes, if a person doesn't get intellectually excited by things, and that comes from a Svias Ratzon, that you're happy with where you are. This is, I don't know which mimer came first, and like it seems so like similar but different.
Interesting. I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, that's on Parshas Mishpatim, very famous mimer, and I'm not sure which one came first. I could look it up. Not sure which one came
what's
first.
the difference then in the Nakuda? Like, are they so
The
similar?
point there between that mimer and this is in Lo Tiyam Shekela V'Akar Ba'artzacha. The main point the Rebbe is making is what you need to do is be completely Ibergegeben. Like, you don't want to be barren. You don't want to have stillborns spiritually, and to be blessed with the real children, it's by your whole life being about Hashem. That's the point that I was making there. Like, you have to be totally given to Hashem. But the Rebbe is saying here, which might, all roads lead, it might bring you to the same point in a different way, is activate the deep pleasure we all feel naturally for Hashem, but most people aren't living with their core. So what we feel naturally and deeply is not our working reality. It'd be like, I don't know, the muscle, a mother and a child, and you're walking around and you're annoyed, and why doesn't he pick up his coat, and why doesn't he put away his shoes, and why isn't he doing his homework? You're annoyed. God forbid something would happen. Suddenly all your love for this child comes out, and you're just gushing with this love for this child, and you're doing anything to save this child. So if you felt like that, why are you treating him like this? Because you're not living at your core. You're not in touch with what you really feel. And your working reality, you're tired and you're drained, and you're trying to keep the house clean, and he's done, and you're just annoyed. But that's what you feel at your core, but you're not living at your core. So I was saying that Lemachal, obviously, that every single Jew at our core, all we want is Hashem. And the only thing that gives us pleasure is Hashem. And Hashem gives us enormous pleasure. At our core, every taste of Hashem is like, wow. But because I'm not necessarily in touch with my core, unless I work to access my core, I'm doing it. It filters through enough that I know this is the life I want to lead, that I believe in Hashem, and I know the best thing is to serve him, so I'm doing it. But on a daily basis, it could be a little bit of automatic pilot. I'm not living with a deep choice I made to live this way. I'm just living this way. So a little bit it filters in, and I feel it, but not enough, the Rebbe says, for it to do what it's supposed to do, which is when you're learning to actually have that emotional response. And why do we care so much? Okay, so I don't have the emotional response. That's the whole point. Like, that goes back to like Tanya pre-101. Learn to have the response to live a life for Hashem. What gets me to live a life for Hashem? My feelings. What gets me to have feelings? My emotions. But the Rebbe now is saying, emotions with the pleasure. When I have that pleasure in God, and then I'm using my mind, then the emotions naturally flow, and then I lead a joyous, excited, empowered life serving Hashem. That's the point. So I think this is super practical, which is not always what you find in a mimer, and it's fine if a mimer is not. But to me, this idea is like so gripping, because how often do we go through the motions? Not resentfully, not negatively, just go through the motions. And they're saying, no, you got to enjoy it. You've got to really get into, each one of us, again, however much we can, the joy that I can daven, that I can serve, that I can do all these mitzvahs, that my house is kosher and my clothing is sneeze, that I have Shavous in my life, that I can learn, that I can say Tehillim, like say Tehillim with geschmack, that I could say Tehillim, daven with geschmack, that I can daven, learn with geschmack, that I can learn, knowing that all of this is connecting me to Hashem, and that's what I want. And that feels really good. It's sort of like, I sometimes think, like, as Lubavitchers, the Rebbe sort of trained us, wired us, that if we help somebody else, we feel so good. We're on such a high. Yes, I hope you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, you met someone, it was with time, and it wasn't just yeah, thank you very much. You had a real conversation and you felt the person really was into it, and you were like, oh, you're so happy. You're learning with someone and they get into it and they care and they ask questions and they absorb your answers, and you're like, oh, you're so happy. Like, what happened? Did someone give you money? No. Did this solve any of the 20 problems in your life that are on the moment, the surface of the problems? No. So why are you so happy? And it just feels so good to know you helped connect another Jew to Hashem. Feels so good. So this taste, this pleasure, it feels so good. Imagine like you're davening and it just feels so good to daven. You're learning, it just feels so good to learn. You're cooking for Shabbos. It feels so good to prepare for Shabbos. You're serving a Shabbos meal. It feels so good to have the Shabbos meal. You're looking at all your modest clothing in your closet. It feels so good to know that I'm tznius. That's what the Rebbe is saying. That when we live like that, everything else is different because everything we're doing affects us. And without that pleasure, it doesn't say, so, okay, I might as well throw in the towel and not do anything because no, I mean, that's not what we're saying. But we're striving because we could do it to bring out that pleasure. And then doing the same thing we're doing, it will make such a difference in terms of how those things impact us. So we will stop at this point. We shall have Kabbalah Satar B'Simcha Pnimius. We shall be in shul to get the Torah. We should all try to convince anyone we know to go to shul for the Torah. I always think it's so interesting that the first day of Shavous is probably the least populous day in any shul, besides in Chabad. The men were up all night, they crashed, the ladies, their husbands aren't going, they're not going. It's like the least attended shul day. And it's really wonderful to try to share with people the light of like, God's giving the Torah one more time. I don't know what it is, 3,336 or so. And we want to be there. We want to get it. We can get it, just something else we just have as a gift. We know. And it feels so good if you share it with someone else and they're like, okay, I'll go. Good Shabbos. And thank you so much for joining.
Can I share a thought?
Sure.
On what you're saying? This reminds me of this concept of in like not psychology, but an understanding how we work. When we have concepts like could be either external or internal, and people can be talking about how they work and understanding and analyzing their family, analyzing everyone around them, analyzing themselves, but they don't stop to feel. They don't stop to take it internal. And it's called like just staying external. And then versus like, okay, you got to go internal. And sometimes it's like a coping mechanism that people will do that this is what they do to avoid having to do the inner work, to avoid having to face themselves, their emotions. It's an avoidance strategy. So called going internal. So I'm translating this from what you're describing. Like, like when we're cooking for Shabbos and we're like, okay, stop and take the moment inward. Go inward for a moment.
And that's great. That's a wonderful translation. That's great. I hope that was very helpful, to anyone else who's listening, because I think that's a good model. Take what we're doing and go in deep, breathe it all in very, very deeply and feel the joy. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining.